And as Adriana pointed out, the historiography of the Bay of Pigs has been divided into two camps. Basically, more or less the Miami-dominated camp of retired CIA people and former members of the brigade accusing Kennedy of selling them out, betraying them. And then the Kennedy clique, if you will, the advisors who wrote, Ted Sorensen, Arthur Schlesinger, who wrote the histories and the memoirs of the 1,000 days here that John F. Kennedy's presidency had, and those 3 days in particular at the Bay of Pigs, and basically argued that the CIA had misled him about the Bay of Pigs. And you have these kind of two competing discussions of what happened. And the truth of the matter is that the CIA's own Inspector General put the blame squarely on the agency itself for engaging in what was essentially an overt paramilitary operation when it had neither the responsibility, as the Inspector General pointed out, nor the capability of doing so. And the issue really in my mind is not whether John F. Kennedy, if he had authorized a second airstrike to take out Fidel's planes and create a no-fly zone over the bay, or whether he had given the green light for the U.S. military to go in after Alfredo and his companions when it looked like they were losing, basically sold out the operation. What the history shows is that Eisenhower said to the CIA, we can overthrow Castro, but it has to be covert. And Kennedy came in, and he said to the CIA, who presented him with a plan, by the way, of an open invasion in the middle of the day at the city of Trinidad, which was hardly covert. And he came back to them and said, well, let's make this a little less noisy, please. You should have an invasion at night, and it should be in an isolated place. And so he forced a change of the plan that was hard for the CIA to do in a very short period of time. There's no doubt about that. But the point of the matter was that the CIA was in charge of this because, and this is hard to say, but we have to say it, it was an illegitimate invasion of a sovereign country. It was an effort to roll back the Cuban Revolution, but Fidel Castro had not attacked the United States of America. The rest of Latin America was going to be very upset with another example of U.S. imperialism and a throwback to what was known in the region as gunboat diplomacy. And so two presidents, Eisenhower and Kennedy, both said, okay, we want to overthrow Castro, but it has to be done without us being identified. It has to be plausibly deniable. And this was the restriction on the invasion that really did result in its failure. The planes, as Alfredo pointed out, the brigade planes had to fly all the way from Central America to get over the beachhead to protect Alfredo and his companions. They had to fly hours to get there, and they only had enough fuel to fly over the beachhead for about an hour and a half before they had to turn around and go back unless they could secure that airstrip there, which never actually happened. Kennedy did actually authorize protection for them, and on my website, www.nsarchive.org, you can hear him and his brother talking about why that also failed, because the planes coming from Central America were on Central America time. The planes that were supposed to fly cover for them off the USS Essex were on Eastern Standard Time. And they just got there an hour apart. And you can hear, as if you were sitting in the room with them, John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy discussing this on the telephone when the issue actually came up in a Senate investigative hearing several weeks later. So those are part of the restrictions. You couldn't be trained in the United States. We couldn't use U.S. forces directly. Kennedy didn't want any U.S. pilots, although actually 4 Americans did pilot those planes on behalf of the brigade and were killed. And that's the reason why. If the decision was that we had enough of a stake in rolling back the Cuban Revolution that we should invade Cuba directly and openly, that was one issue. That's where the debate was. But the debate at that time was, we'd like to see Castro gone. We can't take the costs of an actual invasion of Cuba because we've signed the UN Charter, and it says that we're not allowed to invade other sovereign countries, and therefore we're going to try and do this on the sly. Not quite on the cheap, because it was very costly, but on the sly. And of course, it didn't work at all. And that's essentially the answer.